This podcast is a production of Widener Law Commonwealth in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. For more information, visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu/podcast. Now here's your host, Julie Massing.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Today we have with us Professor Jill Family. She is the director of the Law and Government Institute at Widener Law Commonwealth. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And also, Jill's expertise is in the area of immigration law. She also teaches civil procedure and administrative law here at the law school. And today she's going to talk a little bit about immigration law and also kind of what's going on with immigration policy and the current presidential administration. So just to get started, how does the immigration process work? What happens if a person is caught illegally in this country?
Well, actually, if I could go back a step, I think it's important to understand how the legal immigration system works before we get to the question of, so how does someone end up being here illegally? Because I think an understanding of the legal immigration system is really helpful to understand how it is that we've ended up in a situation where we have 11 million people who are in the United States without legal permission to be here. And so the way that the legal immigration system works is that Congress sets categories and quotas. So Congress, by statute, says these are the categories of people who may get legal permission to be in the United States. And that can be either based on a close family relationship, like I'm a U.S. citizen, I marry a foreign national, I can petition for that foreign national to get a green card based now on our close spousal relationship. Or it can be based on certain employment relationships. The tricky thing is that the legal immigration categories are not very broad, and they're very specific, and especially in the employment-based categories, they're heavily weighted towards high-skilled immigrants. So for a lot of foreign nationals in the world, there simply are no legal avenues for them to follow. So for example, if you are a low-skilled immigrant, there just aren't a lot of legal slots available to you under our current legal immigration system. The other piece of it that is probably as important are the quotas, because not only are there categories, but Congress also sets quotas every year. So if you fall under a certain category, either family-based or employment-based, Congress sets a numerical limit on how many people can come to the United States under that category every year. So even if you meet the requirements of the category, you might not be able to come if the quota for that category has already been met that year. And further compounding things, and this is, you're getting your first taste of why immigration law is so complicated, even though it seems like maybe it doesn't have to be, is that there not only are per category quotas, there are also per country quotas.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So, and what's even crazier about the per country quotas is that the per country quotas are the same no matter the country. So Mexico has the same per country quota as some tiny Pacific nation, right? Or Luxembourg or something like that. And so you can get quota backlogs, not only because the category is backed up, but also because the foreign national who's applying for admission in that category happens to be a national of a country that has a lot of individuals who are trying to get to the United States. So the problem is that even if someone falls under a legal immigration category, they still might not be able to come here legally because of those quota backlogs.
Okay, you're right. There's a lot of overlapping and a lot of different paths that need to happen. My question is about the quotas. Do those change in the category or year by year, or are they set?
No, they're pretty much set. And this is part of the problem, is that Congress hasn't made any statutory changes to the legal immigration system in quite some time. I think the last major bill was in the early 90s, and even that didn't make huge wholesale changes. And so for 10, 15 years, there's this debate's been going on of should we make changes to the legal immigration system to sort of bring it more up to date, more in tune with, to sort of make the supply more in tune with the demand. But it's just failed. I mean, Congress has tried, and just, neither party has been able to push a comprehensive immigration reform bill through Congress and have it signed by the president. And so we're sort of stuck in this stalemate. And in the meantime, the system that we have isn't really working. And, everybody agrees that the system needs to be fixed, but people can't agree on what exactly needs to be changed.
And within all of that, I can understand how, without dotting all the I's and crossing the T's and getting everything in order, how somebody could end up in America legally, or in a country without documentation.
Yeah. And go ahead.
I was going to say in a situation where they needed to have documentation, or maybe the documentation wasn't correct, and not even knowing that themselves.
Yeah. So some of it is super technical, and you might have some people who think that they have legal status and they don't. But a lot of it is people who either came to the United States with permission to come, say on a temporary basis, say as a tourist or a student, or even for a temporary job, and then they just stayed. So that we call that an overstay. Somebody overstayed their period of lawful entry. And then you have a whole other category of people who, for a variety of reasons, either economic reasons, because they're fleeing persecution, because they want to be with their nuclear family, have crossed the border without permission. And one of the big challenges is that the population of undocumented people is not monolithic. So it's hard, you sort of hear this policy discussion about, the undocumented. That could refer to people in varying scenarios. You could be talking about somebody who was brought to the United States as a baby that crossed the border without permission and, is now in high school and is really sort of just becoming conscious of the fact that they don't have any legal status in the United States. You could be talking about somebody, who's been in the country without permission for 30 years and they have U.S. citizen children. Maybe they married a U.S. citizen while they were here, but for some reasons, even if you're married to a U.S. citizen, you can't regularize your status. And so I think it's important to understand that, when you're talking about the undocumented population, it's not, that every person is in the exact same situation.
Mm-hmm. So then enter the immigration attorney, I would assume, if they're, somebody finds themselves in a situation needing help, what are the basic functions of an immigration lawyer? How can they help this person through this process?
Sure. So I was a practicing immigration attorney before I came to teach at the law school. I practiced in Philadelphia, and I practiced what's referred to within immigration law circles as business immigration law. So I represented a lot of multinational companies who were moving employees to the United States temporarily or permanently, that did work for the company outside of the United States. I also represented a lot of research scientists who are applying for what we call, you can get a green card based on something called being an alien of extraordinary ability, which basically means you're at the very top of your field and whatever your field is. And, we want you to be doing that kind of work in the United States. So that's one kind of immigration law practice, a sort of more business immigration law. Other immigration lawyers never do anything that has to do with business immigration law, and they work more with foreign nationals who are facing removal or deportation from the country. And the work of those attorneys is sort of like a criminal defense attorney, although not the same, because immigration law is a civil area of law. It's not criminal law. So there aren't as many procedural protections available to foreign nationals in removal proceedings as there would be to someone who's a defendant in a criminal trial. And so one of the lesser rights is that immigrants are not provided with government-funded counsel in removal proceedings. And so immigration law attorneys who do that kind of work, there's no public defender for immigration removal cases. And so it would be as if in the criminal realm, if there were no public defenders and it was just only private law attorneys that were practicing, and you could only have a private law attorney if you could afford to pay one yourself. The government wasn't going to provide you with any funds. And so you have some attorneys who are doing that kind of work. You also have some attorneys who are sort of involved more on the nonprofit side. They may be representing asylum seekers, people who are seeking persecution. You may have some attorneys who are sort of doing a little bit of everything. And yeah, so I think that gives sort of a sense of the variety of ways to be an immigration law attorney.
Now, because attorneys are not provided as they would be in a criminal proceeding, do a lot of immigration attorneys do a lot of pro bono work? Because I can't imagine that there's a large fund of income for people who may be waiting.
Yeah. No, so there definitely are not enough lawyers to go around. That is clear. And immigration lawyers, they do as much pro bono work as they can. There are also a few nonprofits that will represent foreign nationals in removal proceedings, but there's just not enough. There also are attorneys who don't practice immigration law in their regular practice, but this is their pro bono work. They'll represent asylum seekers, or they'll pick some narrow area of immigration law that's their pro bono work. In fact, just yesterday I was talking to one of our alums because his regular practice has nothing to do with immigration law, but he does his pro bono work in immigration law. So I was answering some questions that he had. And there's been some effort at the state level. So like the state of New York has been really sort of thinking outside of the box in using state funding and also doing some private fundraising to try to provide more funds for legal representation for foreign nationals who happen to be in immigration court proceedings in the state of New York, even though the actual proceedings are federal administrative law proceedings. The state of New York is concerned about, how people are being treated in those proceedings, so it's putting up some of its own money to help immigrants find representation.
Okay. Now, immigration is, as we know, a very hotly debated topic. It's always in the news, especially now during the current administration. Can you just give us kind of an overview about what is happening in the world of immigration? I mean, in a nutshell.
Sure. Well, immigration law is never quiet. I started practicing immigration law late in 2001, right after September 11th, so I've never known it to be quiet. It's always changing. That's one of the things I love about it, is that it's never old. It's constantly challenging everyone involved to sort of keep up with developments. I also love that it's about people. You can really have a big impact on somebody's life as an immigration attorney. As far as what's going on now, even under the Obama administration, people had a lot of complaints, at least as far as the immigrant advocate side, had a lot of complaints about how immigration law was being administered. So I don't want to paint the picture that sort of everything was rosy and great under President Obama, and now suddenly everything's gone horribly wrong. President Obama set records for the numbers of individuals he removed from the United States. I think the big difference now is that with the President Trump's administration, we are saying goodbye to President Obama's attempts to prioritize who might be removed. And along with that prioritization, people in the immigrant community at least had some road markers to go by. So they, it wasn't the sense of, I shouldn't be afraid because I don't have legal status, but at least there was some feeling of, okay, I understand what President Obama is saying, that he's going to prioritize people who have really serious criminal convictions. That's not to say that was a perfect system. There certainly were individuals who got caught up in that system or who were removed, even if, they didn't have serious criminal convictions, and even if they had, U.S. citizen children and that kind of thing. It still was always a very harsh system. It's just now we've moved to a version of it under President Trump where everyone's a priority. And so there's a lot of fear and uncertainty in the immigrant communities. And again, I think we have to remember that when I say immigrant communities, that's not just people who don't have legal papers. That's also their U.S. citizen relatives, their children who, now their parents are afraid to walk them to school because they might encounter immigration and customs enforcement along the way. And so whatever the resolution is, I think we have to keep in mind that, it's not so simple to just say, well, there's undocumented people over here and everybody else is on the other side of the room. It's way more intermeshed than that.
Yeah. Several months ago, we heard news of people being detained in airports, not allowed to continue to their destinations. And we saw pictures of lawyers sitting on the floor helping to draft things. What happened there? Why were those people stopped? What allowed them to continue on? What did those lawyers do for them during that time period?
Yeah. So this was sort of the introduction to President Trump's approach to immigration was this executive order that he released in January called Muslim Ban or Travel Ban 1.0, because we'll get to what 2.0 was in just a second. And basically this executive order that came out that tried to halt immigration immediately from several Muslim majority nations. And the first ban that came out, when it came out, it wasn't clear. It looked like it applied to returning lawful permanent residents. So even if you had a green card, if you happened to be traveling out of the United States when the executive order was released, you couldn't get back in, even if you had a green card, which is potentially indefinite permission to be in the United States. And means that the United States is your full-time residence. It's not citizenship yet, but it's the step right before citizenship. And it also, when that first travel ban came out, it applied to people who had non-immigrant visas, which are temporary visas. So they had permission to the United States to visit, to study, perhaps to work temporarily. But again, if you happen to be outside the United States and coming back, you were no longer going to be admitted if you were a national of one of those countries that was identified. Also, really quickly, a question arose of, what if you're a dual citizen? What if you have a passport from one of those nations that are mentioned in the travel ban, but you're also a British citizen or something like that? And so part of the problem was this executive order came out. I don't know for sure, but it didn't seem to have been vetted through the appropriate channels within the government to sort of work out and brainstorm, right? What are all of the things that we're not seeing right away that could potentially go wrong with this? So the executive order is released. Literally, people were on planes when the executive order was released. And so they started landing at the airports, and the Customs and Border Patrol officers, they're following their orders. And this huge confusion erupts. And then we saw, really, I think, rather heroically, we saw sort of communities of lawyers, at the drop of a hat, run down and start to organize themselves at the airports to, try to figure out what was going on, because it wasn't, everything I just described was not as clear as it was happening. And also to start, asking questions and demanding due process, because, all lawyers know that that's really important, and transparency, and, trying to see if there was a way to figure out what was going on and if they could help these individuals. And then eventually litigation was started challenging the first version of the travel ban. And injunctions were issued, sort of putting a freeze on the status quo and saying, don't implement the travel ban anymore until a court can sort of get its hands around it and sort of figure out exactly what's going on. And so eventually the Trump administration sort of gave up on the first travel ban, and then eventually they released Travel Ban 2.0, which is still, it actually isn't in place right now because there was a restraining order issued against 2.0 while the courts sort of figure out and hear the legal challenges against it.
Okay. So now, as we kind of talked through this, we said, 2.0 isn't currently in place, but I guess how is the current administration looking to change the way that the immigration process works for people coming into the country, both legally and illegally?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a restrictionist theme. I think that's clear from President Trump's remarks on the campaign trail, as well as evident through some of the appointments he's been making in the immigration agencies. And so I think there's definitely a theme coming from his administration that, immigration is not a good thing for the United States and that it needs to be restricted. I don't think that position is correct. I also think there's been a lot of fear-mongering surrounding immigration that I don't agree with. And I think President Trump, part of this, I think, falls under a larger theme of he's sort of realizing as he gets to work that things are maybe a little bit more complicated than they seemed on the campaign trail. Yes. Yeah, which would be true of any president. And, so it'll be interesting to see what exactly happens. I mean, so far, there's a group of undocumented individuals called the Dreamers. These are, I referred to them earlier, these are individuals who were brought to the United States as children, so they had it wasn't their decision to come to the United States without permission, and they were raised here, and they're young adults or even college graduates at this point. And under President Obama's administration, he gave them something called DACA, Deferred Action for Child Arrivals. And deferred action is a revocable promise not to deport. So he gave them sort of some signal, you're really low down on the priority list. And that the DACA program is still technically in effect, but it'll be really interesting to see what the Trump administration does with it, because that was, it's essentially an act of prosecutorial discretion. So the Trump administration could decide that it doesn't want to exercise that kind of prosecutorial discretion.
Okay. So now we talked a little bit about Obama and we talked a little bit about the Trump. Both administrations have some similarities and a lot of differences. But how does the current administration's immigration policy differ from the Obama administration, specifically, I guess, 2.0 that's currently kind of in review by the court right now?
Well, so there was no travel ban under the Obama administration. And, one of the big challenges to the travel ban is that it's based on religious discrimination, that it's aimed to keep out Muslims. And so it'll be interesting to see how that sort of works its way through the court. I think the other big difference is in terms of rhetoric. Even though President Obama set records for removing people, his rhetoric was drastically different on immigration, and he was willing to acknowledge the many contributions that immigrants make to the United States. And I think President Obama saw, his immigration policy as, he was really trying to create an atmosphere where there could be bipartisan compromise, and maybe we could get some legislative changes to the immigration statutes, getting back to my answer earlier on about how the legal immigration system works. That never happened. And so far, I don't think that the Trump administration has shown many signs that it's as interested in that.
Now, between administrations, is there typically usually a large shift in immigration policy between different administrations? Have we seen this type of thing, this swing happen before?
Yeah, I think change in any administration, it's natural to see changes in priorities. I don't know. This is a pretty drastic change, especially in terms of the rhetoric. It's funny. We used to say, and I guess it's still true, that immigration really didn't break neatly on Republican and Democratic lines. You often had mixes of opinions within both parties about immigration. I think it's become more of a partisan issue. But President Bush, the second President Bush, he really pushed hard for comprehensive immigration reform. And again, while, he certainly pursued enforcement, he also had very different rhetoric and language about immigration. He was much more welcoming and inclusive than the rhetoric so far of the Trump administration.
Yes. And so I guess kind of to wrap things up a little bit, where do you see immigration policy going under this current administration? I know that's like the $1 million question, and kind of hard to, see, but what are some of your thoughts on that?
I'm not really hopeful. Some of it may depend on what happens in the 2018 congressional elections. I think for now, we're probably going to see more pronouncements from the executive branch that will be challenged in court. And, we're really going to see some separation of powers in action in terms of the courts doing what they're supposed to do and reviewing the actions of the executive branch. From a legal and a law professor perspective, that part of it is going to be fascinating because historically the courts have taken sort of a hands-off approach when it comes to immigration law because they viewed it as a sort of foreign policy, national security, sovereignty kind of issue that really wasn't for the courts. But that all started in the 19th century, and now it's the 21st century, and we have a president doing unprecedented things when it comes to immigration law. I mean, some of the things, to be quite honest, some of the things that President Trump is trying to do or proposing to do, I used to use similar things as hypotheticals in my immigration law class, and my students would look at me like, that would never happen.
And here we are.
And I'm teaching immigration law soon, and I'm going to have to, come up with some new hypotheticals.
Hypotheticals. Well, thank you so much for giving us some insight on this hot topic.
Sure.
I have one more fun question for you. Our listeners know that we like to end on a fun note. So with summer vacation coming up, what is your favorite vacation spot?
So if I can cheat and have two.
Absolutely.
One is the Jersey Shore because that's where I grew up.
Okay.
And the other is London because I married into a family that has British roots. And so we try to go back when we can in the summer and catch up with some family on the other side of the pond.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, thank you, Professor Family, so much for joining us today. Listeners, please keep an ear out for our next podcast, which will be coming up soon. Thanks, and thanks for listening.
Widener University Commonwealth Law School is the Pennsylvania capital's only law school, with 3 specialized centers of legal scholarship through its Law and Government Institute, Environmental Law and Sustainability Center, and Business Advising Program. Widener Law Commonwealth offers an exceptional learning experience that is personal, practical, and professional. Visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu for more information.